If you could, you would never go to a lawyer. That would be your first mistake. Why? Because the law believes that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Hi, my name's Peter Hansen. I'm a lawyer in Metrotown in Burnaby. I'm here to tell you that the best time to see a lawyer is when you don't have a legal problem at all. I've practiced law for 32 years in the Lower Mainland. I have a wide range of experience in various areas of law, from presenting matters in court to drafting legal documents. Over the years, I've come to focus on corporate support in the sense that clients who incorporate their companies with our offices bring us matters incidental to their business lives and to their personal lives. Now, when it comes to our personal lives, there are 3 documents that everyone, and I mean everyone, should have in place. Namely, a will, an enduring power of attorney, and a representation agreement. You've heard it said, 2 things are certain in life, death and taxes. Be proactive. I can help. Let's get started. Let's get 3 foundational documents in place in order to protect you and your loved ones for the future. Call me now.
Hello, welcome to Rapid Fire Marketing on LinkedIn Live. My name is Moreno. I'm your host. Today, I'm joined by Peter Hansen, who is the founder of the Peter W. Hansen Law Corporation, which focuses on solicitors' work and general civil litigation, wills, and estates. Peter, you've been a member of the Law Society of British Columbia, Canada for 35 years. In good standing, I should add. You are also an author. You've written the novel Eye in the Dark. We can get a copy on Amazon, iTunes, Kobo Books, Barnes & Noble, and we can have it in an ebook or hardcover. You are also an athlete. You've run the marathon in 3 hours and 51 minutes. It must be noted that most people finish a marathon between 4 and 5 hours. A finishing time that's under 4 hours is a real accomplishment, other than elite runners who can finish in just over 2 hours.
Yes.
Peter, you are going to talk to us about that most important document called the will. The first question is a simple one. However, there may be more than meets the eye. Let me put the question up. What is a will?
All right. Hello, Moreno. Hello, everyone. What is a will? It's a very interesting question because it's not always apparent what it is. And I think that working with it, we can get some creativity in terms of how to view it. A will is a strange document in one sense. It's because it's a voice from beyond. It takes effect after a person passes away, has died, and yet it has an effect on the world of the living. It's not a contract really. It's a trust. It's a series of trusts because it involves someone called an executor who agrees to do things with your estate the way you want it, and to be obliged to do that and to do a good job of it after you've passed on. So these trusts are interesting because a trust is an obligation. It's giving discretion to someone to make decisions. So in that sense, it's different from a contract. it has a little bit of open-endedness about it. It deals with things, basic things, such as dealing with your debts and that sort of thing. It's about finding out exactly what a person owns after they've passed away. And then once they've done that, then dealing with those things in the way that the person who has dearly departed wants. Um, Typical thing is to this to my spouse and to children, for example, that type of thing. And a will is it's about property, and it's about uh, obligations that are connected with that property. So that's I think the best way to describe it. And the other thing about it is that uh, it's something that everyone needs to have, because it's no good after you've passed away to think about a will, obviously. It's about being proactive. It's about imagining the future. So it's a very strange thing, and some people don't like it because it gets you down to thinking about very philosophical things, about like, what would it be like to imagine a world in which I don't exist? And for some people, and especially young people, this is a very bizarre question that is oftentimes never thought about, but it's something that should be thought about. So a will is, as I say, something that occurs after you've passed away. It it it's about trust, and not just trust in a kind of legal way, but trust in the sense of, you trust somebody, you trust them to do the right thing, because it's not just your stuff. It's also you have an executor has a responsibility to beneficiaries. Those are the people that are going to get the things that are mentioned in the will. So those people are depending on the executor to do what the will says. And the will is a list, it's a memorandum, it's a list of things that you want to have done with your estate.
You mentioned that an executor gets things in the will done. So that prompts the question, who can be an executor?
An executor can be any adult person, and there's some limits on it. For example, you can't, by means of a power of attorney, become an executor. You can't create a will by a power of attorney. Someone who's an attorney for someone can't make a will for someone. That kind of thing. So to get back to the idea of executor, is someone that you trust, and it should be a responsible person. It should also be a person who will likely be alive after you've passed away. So it's perhaps not the best idea to pick someone who is much older than you to be the executor, because the chances are that that person will not be living at the time that your will takes effect. So very, very basic ideas like that are something that you should consider when thinking about an executor. And as I say, being an executor, it's it's a task, it's a job. It's not star spangled and glamorous. It's got a lot of work involved with it. And yes, an executor does get paid for their expenses, and they can get certain amounts, percentages, um, for the work that they do. But it's not a glorious route, to be in the world. It's something that someone does, I think, out of honor, a lot of times, honor and remembering the person who has passed away, and a kind of gratitude, I suppose. I think that is true, and most executors, from what I've seen, really feel diligent about it. They want to do a good job. I think that's very true about most of the executors that you see. So so other than it being an adult, um, other than it being someone with that you trust, someone that is responsible, diligent, trustworthy, who has, depending on what your estate is, you may, if you are involved in a business, you might want to have someone who is a business person. So that might guide your decision as to who the executor should be, those kind of things. It can be your children. Sometimes people choose their children, but they oftentimes choose people or choose children who are mature, responsible, and can be trusted to do things correctly. So there's those kinds of ideas.
You've given us some very interesting pointers for selecting an executor, especially making sure that they're not too old. Should I have a multiple will?
That's a very good question. So there has arisen, I don't know, maybe it's been around for quite some time, but it's multiple wills are this something that arises when, particularly when you have a situation where you have corporate assets, shares in companies, those sorts of things. And you want to deal with those corporate matters separately and differently than what you do from the rest of your estate. And so it's always a matter of looking at things from tax perspectives and that kind of those kind of ideas. But it may behoove you to have two executors, two wills, one to deal with what we call primary assets, the usual types of things that go into an estate, your personal property of various types, and could be investment, it could be almost anything. And then you may have, as I say, corporate assets, things that you don't want to pass through probate, that you have mechanisms that are in place to deal with corporate assets. It's one of the things that I've been doing lately. It's something that seems to be accepted by the probate registries. It remains to be seen what happens with it. It looks like it works well, but it has difficulties along with it, because with multiple wills you'll have two wills. So then you have the cost of making two wills, and that's something to think about. It also has other kinds of perhaps issues that arise when you think about, well, who's going to pay for the taxes involved in this? Is there going to be enough money in both estates to do whatever needs to be done? So there's many different issues. There's complexities to it that you may not want to have, but you may also want to have it because it may allow you to do things more quickly than perhaps might be the case if you went through the usual probate process, and that might be of great benefit to you. Anyway, it's something to think about. It's an option, and it's something that we could explore together to see if it's something that's right for you and your circumstances.
Sounds to me the maximum number of wills is 2, personal and business. Should you cut out a never-do-well child from your will?
There you go. How much control can you really have over the world after you've passed away? And that is a very interesting and strange question. The other thing about it is that I'll just answer it right off the bat. No, you should not. And perhaps this is about the legislation that we have in our province and in many jurisdictions, is that there's a possibility of variations, a variation of the will by a spouse or by a child. And if you decide to disown a certain child, you may be simply setting the stage for a massive lawsuit in the future. You may, in trying to benefit certain of your children at the expense of the ne'er-do-well child, you may be in effect handing to your children, the ones you like, approve of, etc. You may be just handing them a lawsuit, which will cost a lot of money to resolve, and will not be a happy experience for anyone. I believe, and I'm not sure about this, and I don't think anybody is, but I think the idea that society, that our community has, is that when it comes to children, share and share alike, split it up evenly. That's the way to do it. Don't favor anyone over the other. You can do things like that, but it's always causing difficulty, in my view. So there could be situations where it's very particular, a very particular situation where there's been maybe violence involved and things like that, where it may be a situation where the person has very good reasons for not providing for a certain child. But even so, I think that it's always best to look at this in terms of big picture. And it's not just about your family as it appears upon your death, but trying to think about your family in terms of hundreds of years. What will it be like for your ancestors hundreds of years from now? The dynamics of what may have gone into the difficulty with the ne'er-do-well child will be long gone as the centuries pass. And maybe that's a way to help understand that idea. And sometimes the child that has the most difficulties is the child that's in most need for some influx of assets and assistance and all those kinds of things. Maybe it can also lead to problems, but the person who has difficulties in their lives are not necessarily without any needs for the future. They definitely have needs for the future. And so it's a difficult thing to deal with for parents, but it's something they have to deal with it. And they have to, in my view, they should take the big picture approach to everything. And that's not always easy to do. But it is a marvelous thing when you see it happen, when someone has very strong ideas about it. And then as the years pass, they come to this understanding where they put it all aside. And that to me is a beautiful moment. I've seen it occur, and I think it is really the way to go for the future, because who knows what, centuries from now, what that will be like. And I think that's something to think about.
That's very good advice for families with many children that include a black sheep? Should you have a complicated will to deal with a family recreational property that you want to be kept as a recreational property for as long as possible?
There you go. I've seen this occur from time to time. The recreational property that the individual wants to preserve as a recreational property for as long as possible into the generations, that type of thing, which is a very noble idea. I think it's a very good idea, but it is complicated, and it may not be so helpful to your family as your family grows and becomes what it will be in the fullness of time. It's complicated. And so if it's complicated, the trouble with that is that it means that you have to draft things. And when you start drafting special clauses in a will, then it becomes much more expensive than your usual, straightforward will. It becomes this work, and then it goes from there. And it has, once you start going into it, it always has these incredible complexities as to how you're going to deal with it on a day by day basis. How are you going to reach decisions about how you use the property? What about if you want to make some changes? What if it's just some of the children that want to change and the others don't? What if somewhere down the road, and this is a typical situation where the kids just don't want the recreational property anymore and they want to sell it, and that might be hard to think about and consider, but it's something that if you're serious about setting things up for a family recreational property in your will, then that's one of the things you could think about. The other thing is that, okay, if you got a recreational property and you want it to be kept as a recreational property, the thing about that is that there's going to be costs involved in maintaining, repairing, paying for that property as the years go by. And it may be that your children and grandchildren just don't want to bear that cost. They're involved in other things. They want to go in a different direction. But it's something that you have to think about, is just setting aside monies so that you don't reach a situation where the recreational property is in jeopardy simply because funds aren't available to do whatever needs to be done, the taxes, all sorts of things that's involved with the property. So yeah, okay, you can set aside the recreational property, but just know that this is going to create some complexities that have to be dealt with carefully. Can't hear you now.
I think there are many people with recreational properties that don't understand these complexities. I certainly didn't. In your will, should you specify what property, real or personal, that should go to each beneficiary?
Well, the one thing about a will is the idea behind it is that it's to be broad enough and wide enough in its language as to cover everything, every possible piece of property that you have, personal and real. It deals with it. It should be able to deal with it all. So that's the one foundational point. The other thing is that once you begin pulling aside, setting aside one particular property, you begin to create complexity. The complexity of setting that up, it's it's this idea that will somebody want the cottage in the country, or the cottage in the town or something like that, and you're setting that off so that you're going to give them a property. I would uh, I would think that you can always do this, and there may be reasons for this, but I think that the trend would be away from that, to get away from the need to deal with specific pieces of property, simply because it creates all kinds of complexity. It also creates a situation where um, it may be that you lengthen the amount of time, effort, and energy that the executor has to spend in order to arrange all of those things that you want done. Whereas if it's a situation where you are just dealing with whatever the property becomes, such as it's liquidated, and you're dealing with cash and you're distributing an amount of cash, much, much easier to deal with. Uh, and um, and I think it's something that people appreciate just as much as anything else. So I would say, by and large, don't go into the idea of specifying property, real or personal. It creates complexity in the will. The other thing is, it makes for a much more expensive will than one that is drafted in the usual way.
Peter, do I understand you correctly that the best would be to liquidate all assets and then divide them evenly amongst all beneficiaries?
That's the simplest way. The simplest way, less complication, and it may be in the end result what a lot of beneficiaries would prefer.
I have one final question for you, Peter. Should you have multiple executors?
Yeah. So there you go. The what is an executor? What's an executor going to do? And as I mentioned before, it's a job, and it's a lot of tasks, there's a lot of work, and sometimes a lot of hard work. And you sometimes you might think, well, multiple executors. I don't want to just have my one son. I want all my sons involved with it, or my sons and daughters involved with it. And so then you almost get executorship by means of committee, or a situation where you have to have the majority deciding something about a certain question. That leads to complexity. It's fine if everyone thinks about something in the same way. But my experience about a lot of people is that there's a lot of difference in the way everyone looks at things. My advice is, if you can, do not have multiple executors. It sounds like a good idea. It sounds like being inclusive. You're not pushing one person out. You're including everybody. Oh, how nice that is. But at the same time, you lend complexity in the sense that if you've got multiple executors, they may live all in the lower mainland here, but it may be that some of the executors, one's down in California, one's over in Alberta, uh, things like that. It's asking for trouble. It's asking for trouble, especially if you have to have more than one executor signing a sale of property or something like that. It's asking for um, um, multiple costs that could be avoided if you just have one executor. And then the other thing about it is that uh, having multiple executors does give rise to a possibility that the executors will come to an impasse and they can't decide on something. And it is the most terrible thing when you see it happen, because it's totally miserable. It's miserable for the executors to deal with, because there's a difference of opinion, And why set that up? Why create a situation? Why set the terrain in order for the possibility of that to occur? My advice is avoid that altogether. Have one executor. If you can have alternate executors, if something happens to that first person, then you have an alternate. Yeah, sure, that's fine. But don't have them together in a group. It's asking for a lot of workup for something which I don't, in the fullness of time, I don't think that it will really pan out as you might hope for.
Thank you so much, Peter, for bringing to our attention the will and explaining important aspects of the will. Your answers have been informative, educational, and entertaining. We appreciate you taking the time to make us wiser. For sure, there will be people that will want to get in touch with you. Your contact details are these. Are they correct?
They are.
Peter W. Hansen, your telephone number, and your email. A big thank you to our attendees. For additional information, get in touch with Peter. Visit the link down there, and I will post it in the chat. To your continued success and good health, goodbye until we meet again.
Goodbye. Thanks for today. Okay. Ah, yes.